Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are outside on my deck and today is the beginning of seed starting. We are going to be focusing specifically on winter sowing today. In short, winter sowing is the method of starting seeds outdoors during the winter months, which allows them to germinate naturally as the weather warms. The great thing about this technique is it allows us to use recycled materials like milk jugs, plastic bins, to basically create little mini greenhouses that protect the seeds while exposing them to natural temperature fluctuations. In today's project, we are going to cover all of the steps of winter sowing. We're going to start off by talking about our containers and how to prepare them. We're going to be talking about the seeds that you're going to need for winter sowing. Then we're going to be filling up our containers with soil, and we'll talk about which soil is best for winter sowing. Then we're going to be planting our seeds, which is the fun part. We're going to be sealing up our containers, and then we're going to be putting them outdoors. To begin with, let's go over the containers that you can use for winter sowing. The most common container that people use are going to be milk jugs. Now, we don't really drink milk at home, but our neighbors do, so we got these from them. You can also use those water jugs. Those work really well. It's same thing. You can also use the salad containers, like the ones from Costco. Anything that's clear is what you're looking for. Anything that allows light to penetrate through. You can also use these bins. This is just like an old filing bin that we had, but you can see it's translucent. It has a lid, so this would work really well. Now, the great thing about winter sowing is it shouldn't require a ton of investment. So I don't want you to go out and buy a ton of things for this, because that kind of takes away some of the reason why people use this method of sowing seeds. So it's almost like you're upcycling some of the containers and things that you already have on hand without really having to go out and buying a ton of things. That is one of the great things about winter sowing. It is very cost effective in terms of not having to invest lights or racks or heat mats or any of the things that we typically have to invest in when we start our seeds indoors. There are other benefits of winter sowing, and that is if you don't have a ton of space inside of your house to really, set up a rack or a whole seed starting station, this kind of takes that away because you're putting out these containers outdoors. It also allows you to start things like perennials a little bit early. It takes away that whole process of hardening off because now they're already used to the climate of being outside. So you're not babying them during that process of bring them in, bring them out, bring them in, bring them out. And they tend to be really tough little plants. So that is another really great benefit of winter sowing. Now, when should you start winter sowing? That depends on what zone that you're in. I garden here in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon in zone 8B. We swing to 9A, but I really like to garden like I'm in zone 8B, especially because I feel like we're like in a little microclimate. So I always say 8B. And for us, we can start winter sowing after our first frost, which has already happened. So now is really the time between now and March, depending on what seed you're starting, is really the perfect time to start winter sowing. So a good rule of thumb to remember is really after you had your first frost. Before we start sowing our seeds, let's talk about some of the other things you're going to need. To begin with, you're going to need potting soil, not seed starting mix, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You're going to need your seeds, and we'll talk about which seeds you can really start winter sowing. And then you're going to need a little bit of water. You will need some duct tape. You'll need scissors, your container, and we'll talk about drainage holes and all of that stuff. You'll also need a marker. We're going to be using this garden marker, which is my all-time favorite marker to use anytime we're labeling anything for the outdoors. I'm also going to be using little tags. You don't have to use tags. However, I recommend that you do because sometimes even with the best markers, things can wear off being outdoors in the elements. So it's always good to just have a backup. And then I am going to modify the container situation, and we are going to start some seeds in my regular seed starting trays. And we'll talk about that in just a sec. To begin with, let's talk about preparing our containers. Now with the milk jugs, I just made 5 holes on the bottom and 1 on each side of the container, just to make sure we had extra drainage holes because we do live, again, here in the Pacific Northwest where it rains like 80–90% of the time in the winter time. So I just want to make sure that these have good drainage. With the lids, you can go ahead and just get rid of those because we are not going to need them. In our little mini greenhouses that we're creating, we need to be able to water them. And so this hole at the top will do just that. If you live in an area that rains a lot, that's great. If you're in a drier climate, then you might need to come in with like a misting bottle and just mist it maybe like once a week, depending on how dry you are. And if you live in an area that gets snow and snow gets inside, that's perfectly fine. Again, we're just kind of leaving it to nature to do its own thing. Now, not only do we need the holes at the bottom, but we need to go ahead and cut the container to be able to kind of create a flip lid so we can plant our seeds. And then we will use the duct tape to seal everything off. So when you're cutting this, you want to make sure that you're cutting right below the handle. Again, we're going to be creating a little flip lid. And this also allows us to grab onto the container nicely when we are transferring them outdoors. Scissors might not be the best thing, but I cannot find my box knife. So this will just have to do. It doesn't have to be pretty. You just want to make sure that you leave a little bit attached. We don't want to cut it all the way. So see, now we've kind of created a little flip lid so we can get in, plant, and then seal it off. And we'll do the same thing with this one. And now let's prepare our soil. I will be using gloves because I have to touch my camera and I don't want to get my camera all muddy. For the soil, you're going to be using potting soil, not seed starting mix, because potting soil has more nutrients than the seed starting mix. So you need something to kind of hold off your seedlings and your seeds for as long as it takes for them to germinate. So the best thing to use is going to be potting mix. I don't recommend you using anything that has like moisture retention or any of that stuff. That's really not necessary unless you live in a really dry climate. Then you can get away with that. But really, I think just good regular potting mix is going to be the best. I'm going to be using Espoma Organic. That's my favorite potting mix to use. Before we fill up our containers, we are going to moisten the soil a bit just to make sure it's nice and wet. So when we plant our seedlings, we're not dislodging them by watering them in. Now, you don't want your soil sogging wet, but you do want to make sure it's nice and moist. All right, that looks good to me. Now, do you see how you can just kind of form it, but it's not really dripping water? That's kind of the consistency that you're looking for. Whichever container you decide to use, you want to make sure that you have about 3 inches of soil depth and about 2 to 3 inches on the top as well, because as your seedlings start to grow, they're going to need that space. So you don't want to get things that are too shallow in terms of your container, because you want to give them enough room to grow into. So I'm going to start filling up our first milk jug here. So we have about 3 inches of soil. And now the modification that I am going to do this year is growing them in some of my seed starting trays. These are 50 cell trays. These are my favorite. I got these at a local hydroponic store and I love them so much. They're kind of small. So that is the only thing I'm like, should I go bigger? Because if I was to tell you to do this modification, I would probably have you start them in about 4-inch containers. You can put them in a tray liner like this. And then you will need a dome over it. So I have a couple of options. You can use these big ones. Again, you can find these online. I will link some of these products down below if you're interested in getting them, or you can just go to your local nursery center and they might have these. So do you see if I do it this way? We're creating that same little greenhouse effect. These already come with the holes on the top, and I've drained a bunch of little holes on the bottom. So this is really the same concept as doing it in the milk jug. So I'm going to start some like this to see how that goes. And then I also have smaller domes. Again, it's still gonna give me that that height that I need. These are the ones that I use indoors for all of my seed starting. And that's how it would look. So I am going to try it this way. Again, important thing to remember is if you do a lid, even if you do like those food container lids with the aluminum foil bottom and the plastic top, make sure you have holes on the top and you have holes on the bottom. All right, same thing. We're just gonna fill these up quickly. Now that we have this ready, let's talk about which seeds you can winter sow. You can start out by doing a quick Google search. Just type in which flowers can I winter sow or which veggies can I winter sow, and it'll give you a list. I will make sure to pop up some flowers that I like to winter sow or that I recommend for winter sowing. But you can also just read the seed packets, and then that will kind of give you a hint of what you can do. So you're looking for words on the seed packet, things like cold hardy, anything that's a perennial in your zone typically can be winter sown. Anything that says it needs a cold period or a period of stratification, self-seeding, all of those things will kind of give you a hint that, hey, I can winter sow that. And another thing you can do is go out into your own garden, and if you had flowers that self-seeded and now you're seeing them starting to pop up in your garden, that is also another clue that you can use in terms of which flowers or veggies that you can winter sow. We have a bunch of foxgloves coming up in our garden, and those are from 2 years ago, and they're self-seeding right now in their garden. I'll pop up a picture. So that also kind of gives you a hint. For today, I am going to be doing lupine. This is sundial lupine. And then we are going to be doing purple coneflower, which is like such a good flower to winter sow. We also have larkspur. I have splish splash and smoky eyes. Sweet peas are another notorious flower that can be winter sown. Let's see, what else do we have? And I have snapdragons. Now, here's the thing with snapdragons. If you watched our last video, you kind of heard me talking a little bit about snapdragons. That was when we went seed shopping together. And snapdragons are one of the most beautiful flowers to have in the garden as a cut flower. It's just the best. Now, if you live in a warmer climate, like zone 7 and above, you can actually start your snapdragons in the fall. And once they get to about 2 to 3 inches tall, or they have their first 2 sets of true leaves, you can plant them out into your garden, let them overwinter outdoors, and then they will just explode in their size. It's amazing. Now, last year, I actually started them way too late. It was my mistake. So I'm going to go ahead and try winter sowing them now and see how they do. We do have more on the way that I ordered, but I'm going to try these out. Another hint for you in terms of getting really good snapdragons, pay attention to the variety that you're going to buy. I'll pop up a few varieties up on the screen that are really good, but any of like the Potomac series are really good. The Rocket series are really good. Those are generally bigger flowers anyway. So that is also like another hint if you're looking to get longer stems for arranging or for selling and all of that good stuff. So snapdragons, I am really excited to see how these are going to be, how they're going to do for us doing this method of sowing them. Now let's start out with here with the echinacea. I am just going to do a couple of seeds per cell, and we'll just follow the directions in terms of planting depth like we normally would. It is raining so loud right now. I am so sorry if that's too loud. Sprinkle some soil on top, just like this. All right, once we covered that, I came in with a little bit of vermiculite, just fine vermiculite, and just added a thin layer on top. You guys are gonna laugh at my little shovel, but I love this little thing. And the reason that I do that is it helps with moisture retention. It also helps from like bacteria and fungus growing on top of your soil. We learned this from Florette, and it's such a neat little trick, and I love it so much, and it has really been a game changer for us anyway. And then I'm gonna come in with a little bit of water on top. Now I have a really great pump sprayer. I cannot find it, so I'm improvising and using a water bottle with tiny little holes on the lid. Boy, it is really coming down. Wow. And so let's just label this tray. And so now I will just put that in there and cover it up just like this. And then I am going to go ahead and tape it because I am afraid of the wind blowing this off. So let me just go ahead and put a little bit of tape. Just like this. Now these will remain open so water can get in, and that's it. All right, let's do some of our lupine, and these I'm gonna do in the milk jugs. Now, when you're planting these in whatever container you choose to select, I typically don't like to overcrowd my seeds because if you just willy-nilly scatter a bunch of seeds in here, you're going to have to come in with like a butter knife and come in and like slowly cut it out. So for me, I like to give plenty of room between each of my seeds. That way I'm not sitting there peeling them apart, trying not to hurt their root systems. So I give them plenty of space. So with the lupine, I'm just going to do like a couple, maybe like, oh, I don't know, about an inch, half an inch apart. That way it just becomes a little bit easier when we're trying to separate them. Because when it comes to thinning seeds, that is just one of the things I don't like at all. So I try to avoid it at all costs. The other thing you're going to do once you start seeing these sprout, and it could take several weeks for them to do anything, so don't panic. Just let them be. But once you start seeing them grow and they put on their first 2 set of leaves, you're going to come in and you're going to start fertilizing them with about half strength to a quarter strength of fertilizer. I just use like a houseplant liquid fertilizer at half strength, and I start feeding them before I start dividing them and planting them out. Okay, same thing. I'm just going to gently cover them up. These don't need to be planted too deep at all. About 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to come in with a little bit of water. Just water them in. And we'll come in with a little bit of that vermiculite just on the top like this. Now, once these get about 3 inches tall, or they have 2 set of true leaves, and it's time to get them planted out, you can either up pot them or you can plant them directly out into the garden, which is kind of, again, the great thing about this method. There's no time of, or there's no period of hardening off or any of that. So they really can go straight from the jug out into the garden, which is fantastic. And once you start reaching your temps around 60, 65 degrees, you're gonna wanna go ahead and open these up just because it's going to get way too warm. So make sure that you open up those containers once the temperatures start warming up. Let's go ahead, now that we have that there, we are going to seal this up. Okay, just like this. Perfect. I forgot to put the tag in there. Oh, darn it. So what I will do is I will just write lupine all around my container. And there's only one type of lupine I'm going to be growing, so I will know for sure what these are. And so now this is ready. This is such a fun thing. Like, to me, it gets to me every time how, like, it's such a simple method. It's so inexpensive. And pretty soon we're just going to have these beautiful little treasures growing in here, which is amazing. Let's try these snapdragons. These are the Chantilly light salmon, and the seeds are tiny. And snapdragons like to be surface sown because they need light to germinate. So we are not going to cover these, and I'm just gonna gently scatter them throughout here. They're so, so tiny and so hard to see. So we'll have those there, and these are going to be the Chantilly snaps, and put the date in there. And then I'll just tuck it in right here. All right, just like that. And I'll just quickly hit them with a little bit of water. And then we will seal this one up. And now when you are ready to put them outdoors, you're going to put them in an area that's going to get full sun. So for us, it's going to just be, again, like right by our beds out here. They'll be fine over there. And that way I can keep an eye on them. And I'll check on them once a week. If you live in an area that is very dry, you might need to check on them a little bit more frequently in the beginning just to see how the soil is. And if the soil is dry, or if your jug feels very light, or if you see the soil kind of coming away from the walls of the container, you can tell it's drying out. Just water them through the top a little bit. You can just really just go like this. And with that misting bottle, it's great because it really just shoots like a nice, even spread of water. And so there is our second container. And I will go ahead and follow the same steps with the remaining containers that we have. Again, I am going to finish these off in our seed trays and see how that experiment goes. If you've done them in seed trays, I would love to know what your experience was. Again, if you do decide to go this way, I would recommend seed trays that are a little bit bigger. That way you can get a little bit more soil into it. So you can buy those little 6-pack cell seed trays, just something a little bit taller than these. These are really, they're kind of short. These are about 2 inches, and I would like them to be a little bit bigger, especially for winter sowing. But we're going to see how this experiment goes. Hopefully it's going to be great. If not, then we learn our lesson not to use these tiny ones. And really, that's all there is to it. To review, you're only going to need your plastic container. You can use milk jugs, water jugs, salad containers, takeout containers. You can even use the big bins that you have at home that you can buy at Costco. Put in 4-inch containers in it and just cover it up, and that would work just as well. Again, we are modifying our way of doing it this year by using our seed trays, just to experiment to see how that's going to go. Again, we're still creating that same little miniature greenhouse effect with the domes on top. So I'm excited about that. You will need your seeds. Again, look for anything that's a perennial in your zone or a biennial, anything that needs a period of cold temperature or a cold stratification. All of those key words are going to help you determine if that is a seed that you can winter sow. Again, I will leave up a list for you guys to reference. You're going to need your potting soil. Do not use seed starting mix. Potting soil is really gonna hold up your seedlings up until you're getting ready to plant them out. You can go ahead and start fertilizing them once they have their first 2 set of true leaves at half strength fertilizer. Anything that you typically use at half strength or a quarter strength. Again, I like to just use a houseplant fertilizer. It's easy, it's liquid, and I just quickly mix it in. You can also use the vermiculite. Again, totally optional and not necessary. And that's really all you're going to need for this project. Again, make sure you have tape to tape them off. I like to use duct tape. That clear tape won't really hold up really well against rain. And then your marker, of course, to just label everything that you just planted. And that's it. If you've ever winter sowed seeds before, let us know down in the comments section. How was your experience? Was it great? Was it terrible? Did you make any modifications in terms of your containers or how you're starting your seeds? Did you do anything differently? I would love to know down in the comments section. Of course, if you have any questions, let me know as well, and I'll make sure to answer all of your questions. We have tons of seeds coming in. So we are going to be starting thousands of seeds indoors this year. I am so excited to share that whole process with you guys, and I just cannot wait. Like, spring cannot come soon enough. I am so excited that we have something to do in the winter time as we patiently wait for springtime. So anyways, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today in my garden, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.